Okay, this is Charlotte Hennings and Camilla Schofield interviewing Pat Gowen on the 18th of May 2012.
Getting my disease.
So, could you tell us a bit at first about how you came, to work in Norwich and at UEA?
Okay, well, I was born in Norwich. It's always been home to me. And if I've been abroad to work anywhere, I've always come back to Norwich. But my very first job was here in Norwich. I left school at 14 years of age with no qualifications whatsoever. And I worked for the local public analysts, 65 hours a week at the princely sum of 15 shillings per week, 75p in today's money. But mind you, it went a bit further in those days. And it was quite hard work, but at least I was doing a science, which is what I wanted to do, and that's chemistry. And I stayed with them for a while. Then I went into pharmacy. First retail pharmacy, then wholesale pharmacy, and then hospital pharmacy, which I enjoyed. I had various jobs. After a while, I'd managed to save up enough money to get back for further education, because I came out of school with absolutely nothing whatsoever. I could read and write, I think that was it. I managed to save up to get back to the Tech for a whole year. That's the local technical college and art school, part of which was in St George's in Norwich, the other part where it is now at Ipswich Road. And I managed to do the 3 years in the course of one. One needed, in those days, matriculation, and then going on from there. And I realised I was going to need some sort of qualification unless I was going to finish up as a galley slave or something like this. So, fortunately, the fascists had it in for me, because in my school years I would barely be at a school for more than 2 or 3 days before it was bombed. And the result was they lost all of my records. So when I told them I've already done the previous 2 years, they had no alternative but to believe me. Well, of course, it was enormously hard work, working day and night, but I managed to get my required 6 or 7 subjects in the sciences, all but one. And there's one I did not pass. I got a very low mark. I took it again at Christmas and got an even lower mark. And you can guess what that was, because I got a top job in biology at UEA. Yes, it was biology. So that figures. Anyway, that was my school career. Left early and had the year at Tech, which was, of course, a great blessing. Then, during the holidays, at Christmas I'd work for the post office. I'd be sorting all night and delivering all day. And of course I was very rich after about a couple of weeks of this. And during the summer holidays I got a job with the Miller Organ Company here in Norwich to develop, to build and check out the world's first electronic organ, long before the beasts you see now. Well, I'd never seen an electronic organ before. I spent the first week finding out, how to do it. But we built an electronic organ. It was a masterpiece to save the enormous amount of vowels, because in music, there's certain notes you never play two together, otherwise you get a bum note. This one, the first note won and took over, so you couldn't play a bad note. So you could shut your eyes and run your fingers up and down the keyboards, and it sounded marvellous. And we used double diodes instead of separate triodes, so we quartered the number of vowels, and we brought the price down. The ambition was to build an organ for £300, which was a lot of money then. And we did, well under £300. And yes, they're much cheaper relatively now. Anyway, following that, I joined Coleman's of Norwich. This was back in Norwich again after a short trip in Yugoslavia and Albania, in food research. That was quite interesting, but the problem was the ethical things. I was being expected to formulate foods with known carcinogens as colours, as flavours, as antioxidants, as preservatives. And I thought, no, this is not really for me. If I wanted to kill people, I would have joined the army. So I wanted to get out of there. And then I heard rumbles about a university starting in Norwich. So I contacted a few people on the council and other people I knew, and they said, yes, that's quite right. It looks like we're going to go ahead with it. The result was I started working for the university 3 months before there was one. That would be in about June 1963. My office was the park bench in the Cathedral Close. My telephone was the adjacent red public telephone box, and with communications there. And then, after that, we had a caravan at the rear of Earlham Hall, and that was where the first school was formed, the School of Biology. We had 2, I think, students. Or was it 3? Anyway, very few, and a lady who made the tea and swept the floor, and we had a professor who we rarely saw because he was in Edinburgh, and we started off work there and forming a proper department and buying some of the stuff we needed. That would be September 1963 that I then officially joined UEA as a member of staff, although I was working for them unofficially 3 months before that.
And how old were you at that point when you first started?
I'd have to work that out. I was born on April the 3rd, 1932 AD. I know it should be BC, really. So I'll let you do the calculation.
So that would be 31, about?
Yeah, I guess I would be, yeah. I can never work out how old I am because it changes every year. Yeah. But I do remember when I was born, I can do a calculation. So that went on, let's see. I retired in February 1983, but we'll get back to that later. We had Frank Thistlethwaite appointed as Vice-Chancellor. That was in 1961. He'd already been tentatively appointed, and he stayed with us till 1980, I believe it was. And then it got to be Sir Michael Thompson. Well, as I said, we had started off at the park bench and then the caravan at the rear of Earlham Hall. And then and there we designed and had built the UEA village, which was a series of prefabricated buildings in Wilberforce Road. A kind farmer had given us the land, which was being used as a golf course before then, and we designed it, and they were really adequate, excellent buildings. And if I remember rightly, we had 4 schools in 4 different buildings and departments within each of the schools. That was Oz, the School of Biology, which came first, the School of Biological Studies, to give it its full name, the School of Chemical Studies, Mathematics and Physics. I don't know if there was an environmental sciences then. I don't think there was. I may be wrong.
Studies, I think.
English studies could well be.
Humanities.
Yes. And we were very happy there, and it worked out extremely well. The first students came there. One was a young fellow from Scotland, who was a very nice fellow, always spoke well and passed the time of day with you. The only trouble is that we couldn't understand what he said. You know, I said, "Good morning, Ian, how are you?" You did? Aye, you see. And he was from wilder Scotland, down from Edinburgh. His name was Jack Dainty, whose great qualification was that he used to play for Yorkshire in cricket. Which brings me to a side issue. While we were there, Norwich Union, thinking we had a full-set university, challenged us to a cricket match. I think there were about 12 of us employed, 2 of whom were well past the days of cricket. However, we couldn't refuse it, so we had a game of cricket with them. We thought, we'll be all right. Jack will be there, we'll put him in first, and he'll flog the ball all the way around the ground. And sure enough, we went on and put Jack in. He was out on the 3rd ball. I thought, oh my God. I was in last. I was terrified. They had this bowler. He'd disappear over the horizon, came up, hold his hand up, and something would go past your ear. I thought, if that hits me, I'm a goner. So I was using my bat in self-defence. And about 3 times it clicked, and everybody clapped because it bounced off for a boundary for a 4. But then they put on a slow bowler. I was all right. I could hit him on that. Then they put the fast bowler again. And the first ball, there was a different sort of click, and little bits of wood went everywhere. We didn't win, but I was the highest scorer, so I can brag that I beat a guy who played for Yorkshire. However, I divert. So there was Ian Gibson, who just was a student then, who came down from Edinburgh. Roger Joy, who was a Canadian. And I believe we had then Roger Corbett. He's something to do with the Water Authority these days, I do believe. Now, I remember when we moved into the buildings, the prefabricated buildings, as it was election time. And of course, as you might gather, there were a sea of red posters. All bar 2. One of them was Roger Joy, who had a big vote Conservative up, but he didn't count because being a Canadian he didn't get a vote anyway. And the other one, to my horror, was Ian. So I thought, I'll have to work on Ian, this is no good. So I tried to brainwash him, and sure enough I succeeded. And when I retired as chairman of what was then the Association of Scientific, Technical and Managerial Staffs, he took over. And Ian went from the far right of the Conservative Party to being a leader figurehead in the Socialist Workers' Party. Well, I don't think you could really get much further unless he became a Maoist. Well, of course, he finished up as Dean of the University, and then, of course, our local MP. But sadly, he was purged because his views were somewhat of the left of New Labour. Anyway, that was where we had the first students, and when was it? The first of the new plain buildings, they opened in 1966. I think 1966, can't be right, can it? Yes. Yes, that's right, it was. 1966. It used to be, I think, mainly golf course there and what have you. And, of course, once the buildings were ready, they weren't all built then, of course, we moved across. And we had the whole proper building. Things were never quite the same since then. They were digging a huge pit at the back, extraction of gravel, some for the university buildings, most of it to build the Norwich Southern Bypass. And somebody had a good idea. Why not connect it up when it's exhausted, and instead of using it to put rubbish in, open it up as a broad, and it became the University Broad, and a very good one it is too, of course. And that was a very interesting study for the School of Environmental Studies to see it change from a sterile piece of water and become habited to a living system. I had a great objection to the Sainsbury Centre when they built that, because it had a beautiful view from my office window right over the Broad and everything, and they put this thing in the way. However, I do remember that being built. That was in about the mid-1970s when they built that. I remember a visit by Edward Heath. Julian, one of our students, and I had sneaked into the canteen for a cup of tea, and in comes Edward Heath with somebody guiding him. And he smiled at us and we scowled back at him. I also remember, I don't know when the date of that was, his visit. You might be able to find that. We also had a visit from the Queen and Margaret. I remember we went to see her, and I don't know the date of that either. Now, what was to happen for the university, this is the main buildings, the intent was to build them across here in Pfeiffer's Lane, which is why we moved here. There's nothing like being able to walk to work. You've got no excuse for being late, of course, but it would be very convenient. It used to be an old RAF aerodrome during the war years, 39 till long after 1945. And the original A140 road, which used to go from here to Cromer, via St Faith's, they closed that and took a lot of land on the other side so that the runways were long enough. Well, it never got round to it. They took over, when the RAF left, they took over the residences where the people lived as the UEA residences, and we had nearly all the students were there, which was very handy for us because there was a tennis court and a golf course and of a sort, a putting course anyway, and a football come rugby come cricket field. But then that seemed to got sold off for something, and the decision was made to have it on what I think was a granted piece of land from a local farmer on the University Plain. So it never got to be in Pfeiffer's Lane. What else to tell you?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, you do. I've nearly run out.
What did you think of this? I mean, what were the students like? Because you talked about the sort of the first, or one relationship with the Scottish guy, but
yes,
were they from around East Anglia? Were they mostly middle class?
Not one of them. I think Roger Corbett came from Suffolk, actually. Ian Gibson and Roger Joy came down with Jack Dainty from Edinburgh. They were PhD students. They were doing the PhD. We didn't have any other students. We had no undergrads.
So they kind of came with the professor.
That's right, yes. For continuity, you see. Yeah. They came in free with him. And gradually we built up staff. The School of Biology got split into, we had 4 wings virtually. We had biochemistry, botany, biophysics. There must have been another one. Zoology. Yeah. That was it. Professor Jack Kitching, dear old boy. I guess he's no longer with us now. He was the head of zoology. Jack Dainty was head of biophysics. He just died a couple of years ago. He was a lovely man. Professor Bennett Clark was the dean. He was a lovely old boy. He was really doddry, and he was a most gentle man and very, very polite and pernickety in his habits. We had David, I think it was David Wilkin. Professor David Wilkin, the head of botany. Now, what's the other one? Biochemistry was a little Welshman called Dr. David Davies. I remember him quite well. I don't think any of them are there now. Yeah. I went up once about a year ago, and there are only about 2 people that I faintly recognised. It's become almost alien to me. I sneak up occasionally to use the library for something, and that's about all. So that was my experience, really. And when I did leave the UEA, I missed it like hell. God, you miss the students and our lunchtime conversations, which are at the highest level, really good academic stuff. But at least I got on with the the marine biology work. We form a protest. We're trying to stop the government from dredging, which is causing all this erosion and the loss of all our foreshore and farmland and everything. We aren't having any success because it's a big money spinner, but at least you've got to fight. So, that's about my story. More cues.
Well, I would like to hear more about students, but I guess you said when we were talking initially about the feeling of that little community at the beginning, and I wondered the extent to which you thought you were doing, creating this school, whether you thought you were doing something different or whether you were trying to recreate it, Manchester University, or whether you were thinking about how to teach things differently, or whether there was a sort of a feeling of innovation in the making of this university, or whether you were trying to kind of live up to the expectations of other universities and blah blah blah.
There was a feeling of innovation. Indeed, we were very new.
Yeah.
And we knew that. And we had some experience in how to run things from those who joined us, the professors from other university, and Frank Thistlethwaite, who I think used to be at Cambridge, was it, before us? I'm not sure about that. But generally, we were, in many ways, feeling our way of how to go.
Yeah.
It came to us because we were then in the position of buying the equipment we needed, according to the needs of those who were doing what research and according to the needs of what we would be teaching. And we had the money required, so it was a matter of selection of that and keeping it going, and I looked after all of that. There was a great feeling of joie de vivre about it. You didn't feel that you were a little cog in a great big grinding wheel by any means. You united, and we were all on extremely good friendly terms. Periodically we would do things together, such as organising a trip round Wheatfen Broad to have a look at the zoology and the botany, and indeed the biophysics, because there were things there we could use. We tried to fit into the local community because the university would have been rather alien for Norwich at the time. So it became a part, and of course many of the activities which the students had through the Students' Union, they were open to many people in Norwich. You could join in there, and they had I started off an amateur radio station with them, G3UEA. Others started off a folk club, and goodness knows what. They were very, very happy days. I would have paid to have worked there.
Do you think that that's linked to the moment in time in sort of 1963? Do you think it's related to what was happening in Britain in the 60s?
Yes, I do. There was a great feeling then among young people, I think, as noted by the music of the time and the protest songs and what was going on in other universities over other parts of the world. There was, I don't think it's here today. We had very few students from abroad in those days. Now I think they're majority, aren't they?
It's a lot.
There's a lot.
They're the only ones who can afford it, I guess. It's a shame. But of course the university admission was free then, and grants were relatively free. You only need the right couple of qualifications and you could get in. Of course everybody has now, I suppose, put as a preference Oxford to Cambridge. But quite a lot, wanted to come to UEA.
Why do you think? Why UEA is this?
I ought to ask them. Possibly because they thought it was French. Possibly they'd had a reputation given to them from other people. I had the pleasant of jobs. I used to take time off the office work, and when we had students applying or tentatively applying for a place, I and the staff used to show them round. Take a bundle of about 4 or 5 at one go, and these are your residences, look, you've got this, and show them the sports hall and the refectory and all that.
Show
and
it all off,
Yeah, that's right, this sort of thing. And I enjoyed that very much. And I think they did too. get them a feel. I mean, I also insisted that they met some of the new students to talk things over with them, the existing students, rather than have it all from the staff, so to speak. So, yeah, and that's how it was. I can't really compare it now because I've very much lost touch. I don't leave these on, do I?
What do you think the relationship was between the sort of local area and the new university? How do you think the people felt about this golf course being sort of uprooted? And
I don't think there really was that much communication. There was a lot of letters in the press prior to the university coming. The usual people who said, oh, you'd want to spend money on that, and other people who'd welcomed it. It was built on that part of Norwich, and that's more or less surrounded by a council house area at West Earlham. In the midst of that, where a lot of the people were very much poorer than, say, those who lived out to the south at Eton, which was a distinctly sort of W1 area, more affluent people. What was I going to say about West Earlham? West Earlham was built immediately after World War II. We had some very serious bombing from the Luftwaffe on Norwich, quite a bit, and huge areas were wiped out. I had memories of that too. And rather than the economics of today, they had a very open attitude then. The idea was to rebuild houses in new houses, because many of the old areas bombed were getting to be damn near slums, and which would employ all the guys coming back from the forces to build them, so there was full employment, and also to provide housing for those that didn't have any. So we had these very big council estates, one at West Earlham, next to where UEA now is, another one at Lakenham. Well, of course, a lot of those have been bought now by their owners. There aren't so many left. Now, most of the people who lived in the area were non-academic people, but they benefited because at the beginning there were no real residences, and once the residences of the old RAF quarters over there were full, as the university expanded. Lodgings, that's right.
Yeah.
So the local people benefited by lodgings, and I think it rubbed off both sides.
Yeah. So they were relatively new communities then, after the war. They was being built, doing reconstruction after the war.
Oh yes, West Earlham was nothing but fields before that.
Wow. Yeah.
There was nothing there.
Yeah. So it's a job creator in some ways.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
And of course a home creator too. And it worked out extremely well. We didn't, of course things were still tough. We were still on rationing. You would only buy so much of any particular thing. And that went on for a while after the war. A good thing that it did. It ensured to some extent that things were evened out. It's fairly austere. You certainly didn't have the throwaway society you had today. Left over from the war. You never threw anything away. You kept every bit of newspaper to burn on the fire because there was a limitation on coal. No central heating those. Every bit of string, every bit of brown wrapping paper, all carefully hoarded. Your dustbins were only used, I think, for the ashes from the fire. And if you had a bit of garden, they went on there instead. But a completely different attitude. You know, we didn't need to be taught about recycling. That was there. It had to be. You couldn't afford to do otherwise. But that was, of course, we're now referring to 1945 till about, I suppose things started to go a little sour in about 1953, really. As far ago as that. That's when the rot set in. But under Heath, you know, the government of the day were quite generous, really, to universities. It wasn't really till Margaret Thatcher got in that the crunches came, I think. Prior to that, it was, you know, fine.
Do you
I was going to ask you about the architecture of the main building when it was first built. What did you think of all the concrete?
Brave New World.
I was not impressed. I didn't like it. Lots of the architects, as they always do, went whoopee about it. What was that? Fielden and Mawson, weren't they the architects?
Wasn't it Dennis?
Yeah, there was a few.
Lesden who did that.
Yeah.
Must have been a few.
Yes, I find concrete rather cold. They're
Brutal,
they're nicer inside looking out than they are outside looking in. And to set that there, in a nice sort of river field area, brutal, yes, I think that's a good word. They had quite an impact. So I didn't like it. But then not many old fogies of my age would, Yeah.
Did you think it was a good place for the students, though? I mean, like walking around in terms of like the different pathways.
I think it was. Yes, it's all interlocated, isn't it? Communications are quite good wherever you wanted to go, unless, well, of course, they didn't use the residences here in Pfeiffer's Lane. Once they got the student residences there on the plain, they gradually petered out of use. But for a beginning, of course, it was a bit of a trot to go from one to another. After some time, they got a bus service, I think. But the students seemed to be quite happy there. I think they're too involved, probably, with their studies and other things to worry sort of too much about what you're in. And they probably didn't spend much time looking at it from outside anyway. My wife's an artist, and I don't think she approves much of concrete as it is. And I certainly objected to the Sainsbury's Centre. That's another building. I think outside looking at it, I do not like it at all. But inside,
quite nice.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
It
Like
really
a church
is.
inside. Yeah.
But then it's just a matter, what you like and what you dislike, I think, is a matter of, you tend to think that what you are brought up with is right, and what is alien to that is not right. You tend to think that, but you have to analyse from time to time.
I think even now it splits opinion, though. You find students looking around don't like it because of the concrete, whereas some people do.
And I think you get used to it after a while.
I think you start to like it after a while.
To live with it, yeah. You mentioned your activism after UEA. I wondered if you before we set record, you connected your experiences at UEA to that, and I wondered if you could tell us how you got into that. Into sort of interest in marine.
Oh, did I not put that on the tape? No, I should do.
Because I think that's very important.
Yes.
Connection.
When the university had been established at the Plain for a time, my work began to be rather boring. Firstly, we were getting less and less money for research and less for teaching. It was become more administratively run. There were committees for everything, and I swear they put me on every damn committee. They even put me in charge of the school university vehicle fleet. And as I said before, I know nothing about cars whatsoever. So life gets tedious, don't it, as Peter Lindhayes used to sing. And to get a breather, I used to go out with the North Sea fishermen. Those that went out from Yarmouth and other local ports, and there were many then. I think there's only 2 left now. There's no fish left. And the idea was to catch samples for our marine biology programme. Dr. George Duncan and myself, we were working on the processes of vision, and we were after the squids, the little North Sea sepiola, little squids about as big as your thumb, who had incredible eyes. And just intervening there for a moment, another job which George wouldn't do because he was squeamish was just about every Monday morning I need to take a trip to the local slaughterhouse. The idea was of the animals who were being slaughtered there, the moment they were killed, was to take the eye out because we were working on the processes of vision, on the cornea and the retinal and that sort of thing. George wouldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He'd nearly throw up at the thought of it. So that was my job. Odd job man as well. If anybody wanted anything, go and ask Pat. Incidentally, I used to do the electronic servicing as well, just to keep things going, as well as the ordering and organisation. Anyway, going back to the North Sea fishermen, we used to catch more human debris by way of sanitary objects and goodness knows what than ever we did fish and shrimp, which our purpose was to go shrimping. And I thought then, they'd closed down the sewage treatment works at Yarmouth and they were pumping it about a mile out to sea, having just mashed it up a little bit for a start. And I thought, this is no way to do it. We were beginning to get fish with mutancy forms, distorted backbones, sores over their bodies. And we never had this before, and we'll swear it was some of the viruses and bacteria and toxins being introduced to the sea, as well as the disturbance on the sea bottom from dredging. And I thought to myself, somebody ought to be doing something about this. It's out of sight, nobody knows, and I'd long wanted to start an action group in opposing both the discharge of sewage and waste and the dumping of toxic substances to the sea and the dredging. Because when you dig big holes in the sea, and there's literally thousands of millions of tons involved in this, huge areas, that's the coarse grit and the fine shingle which they go for, because that makes for the best concrete. But when you take that off the bottom, it is in this where all the plants are, it's where the fish spawn, it's where they hibernate, it's where they camouflage. It is their living and eating and feeding area. When you take this off, you're left with a marine desert, just as you would as if you took all the topsoil off your garden. Nothing grows there any longer. So I thought we must oppose this. And what's kept me more than occupied since I left UEA is running, two environmental groups really. One is the North Sea Action Group, which is a local group opposing requests, or I should say applications for new dredging areas. We oppose each one on good scientific grounds, but they get passed every time because it's a money maker. The dredgers make a huge amount of money from it. It sells at about £3.50 to £4.50 per tonne. The government have put VAT on it now at 20%, so they make many millions a year. The Crown Estate own the seabed from the low tide point to 10 miles out. They get, about 50 to 60p for every tonne dredged. So everybody, and they're the ones who give the licences. They just apply to them and they get what they call an environmental assessment. Well, of course, they then employ a firm who they know will give them a clean bill. Otherwise, they wouldn't employ them. And they select the people who do it. They appoint them and they pay for them from the dredgers. And no second opinion is allowed. So they got it all buttoned up. And it's continuing. And we've lost, Norma and I lost a bungalow. We had a coastal bungalow, and along with 91 others, we lost it at Hemsby. The whole dune system, there's now half a dune left of where there used to be 3. And the bungalows have gone with them, and other places around Norfolk. Because as you take stuff from the sea, and then of course it takes the foreshore, it takes the beaches down to go back to the hole. There's deeper water, so you get bigger waves, and the eroding power of a wave is proportional to the square of the height. It also has a bigger gravitational offlow to the beach, so it comes in, undermines your sea defences, undermines the Marham Dunes. And we're losing the beaches. There's many a place in Norfolk, there is no beach now.
So the significance of the concrete blocks at UEA is a different
Yes. They may stay put.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who tends to make up this group, this action group that you?
Well, we're a mixed group.
Yeah.
Large number of trade union organisations and members. Quite a lot of the local fishermen.
Yeah.
All the local. Generally, I'll come to that in a minute. All the local Friends of the Earth group. A lot of members of Greenpeace. The members of the C3, that's the climate change group, are trying to get this government to do something meaningful about CO2 emissions and what have you. Quite a variety, and just people who live at the seaside, who like the seaside and don't want to see it destroyed. We've got a few hundred members, but nationally we've got far more, because we are now the marine wing of Friends of the Earth. Friends of the Earth, as you know, they have campaigns on the air and on the land, but they don't do anything about the sea. This they've ignored. And here, of course, there's an elephant in the room. This has now become far, far more serious now. So we've taken over that side, and we now have, as Marinette members, all the local groups of FOE. So we distribute information to them, and they help us with protests, but we don't get very far. There's, as I say, there's big money in it. And as Bob Dylan said, money doesn't talk, it swears.
And so that you don't have much connection to UEA on this.
No,
this
not
front?
at all.
No, that's interesting.
We've I've tried a way to get a grant. I would like one of them to do a proper investigation. But grants are hard to come by, and the government are unlikely to give a grant for something it doesn't want done.
Right.
And what needs to be done, they did it at Blackpool, paid for, is for a sand movement survey to either using a very mild short-lived isotope or little granular fluorescent beads, stretch it along a piece of coast and then track it and see if it migrates out to the holes and then in the holes of the dredges and then dumped to shore for use as building material as evidence, because the government, because the Department of the Environment say so, that it does not drift from the shore to the holes. They remain quite stable. But we've got at least 5 international bodies who've done work on this, and they proved it does.
Wow.
But not to the satisfaction of our government. They ignore any international research, sometimes in Germany, New Zealand, Holland, quite a lot. They ignore this because it doesn't suit them. And they rely upon the fact that the environmental assessors who are paid for by the dredgers themselves say, it will not cause any erosion. So you said, well, would you like to do all the tests to prove your point?
It seems like you've had a life of political awareness. Where do you think that? When did you become political? I suppose. When did you start? Was that in the context of the war, or was it after that you?
I think
you formed
both.
Politically.
I think I became politically aware when I was about 8, when I had an uncle, or was it a cousin, who fought in the Spanish Civil War on the Republican side, and he used to tell us lurid tales about fascism. And then, of course, we were subject to all what was happening in Nazi Germany. I was only a little chap then. I remember 1939, which was the first day of the war. I was living in Norwich then as a kid. I would be, 7 years old then. And I was down the street, and this wailing sound went. And my mother came down the street at about 300 miles an hour and gathered me up and stuffed me in this Anderson shelter we had in the garden. It was only a test phase. But I was one of the few people hit. I was at school. Oh, this is a couple of years later. I think it was 1941. At a school which was aptly named Crook's Place in Norwich. They changed the name, and I don't blame them. It went to the Big Knoll School, and I'm not sure if it even exists now. Opposite where the Cayley's factory was, opposite Chapel Field, in there. And of course the kids are all full. We didn't realise there was any nastiness in Wall. We were excited. You know, these big machines going over. Oh, look at that. We knew every aircraft. And this single German aircraft, one of two apparently, but we only saw this one, going over Norwich, and then these booms coming, and smoke going up. It was the single German Dornier, I think it was. He bombed, what's the name of it? Riverside, Bolton and Paul's, where they used to make aircraft parts and barbed wire. My uncle worked there. They then bombed Lawrence and Scott's, which was not far away. My father worked there, making submarine motors. And then they probably ran out of bombs. They came up Carrow Hill, and Carrow works now on Brackendale, where they're now making foodstuffs, you know, Reckitt and Coleman's, all that sort of stuff. And they gunned the girls who were leaving off work, going up the hill. They're nearly all girls, because nearly all the fellas were in the forces. And they killed quite a few of them. And then they came over our playground, very low. And of course the teachers were going mad. The kids didn't want to go down the shelters. They thought it was really exciting, you see, me among them. And they couldn't get them down. And this plane, I heard this, you know, like that, and whistles. And it got me. I was the only one hit. And, you know, it didn't hurt at all. It went in through there and out the other side. There was no pain, but it bowled me over. And it bled like Billy-O. I was a school hero. Pat Gowen was shot by the Germans, you know. They weren't Nazis then, they were Germans. It was very national. Very national.
Yeah.
We were taught to hate Germans.
Yeah.
Not to hate fascism or Nazis, mind you.
Yeah.
And so I was the only victim of that. And they never did any harm.
Do you think they knew they were shooting at school?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
At all. We just about see the scar left there now. Very little.
Yeah.
I don't think... No, the teachers were lining the kids up, marching them down the shelters. And they would have seen lines of people. Right. They probably thought it was an army yard. But there's a sequel to this. You never know if it's true, because so many stories go around. The news was created rather than reported in those days in the fashion to which the government thought it would do most good patriotically. This single German aircraft, which apparently had allied up with another one, they shot it down out of the sky at Pouring Land, just to the south of Norwich. Southeasterly, I should think. A lone Bren gunner. You see, Norwich is in a bowl and there's hills all the way round, and he was coming up the hill, not very high, and this Bren gunner brought it down. And it crashed in a field not far away. And such was the hatred, and you get some gory stories now. The farm labourers with their pitchforks decided that the guys in it wouldn't live. There were two of them. And the story we heard that one of them was an Englishman who used to fly from the old Mausold aerodrome here before the war, who went across to Nazi Germany in early 1939s, and he was the pilot navigator. And it's cool, he would have known Norwich like the back of his hand. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it was a well-travelled story.
So the story was he believed in fascism, or he was German by
No,
by
he was an
descent?
English fellow.
Wow.
Yeah, no, he was a fervent admirer of fascism. A lot of people were, most of the aristocracy were actually over here. You know, when Hess went to Scotland to see the lairds, he thought he was going to be welcomed, and then he helped them overcome these idiots in England. Yeah. So he was an English guy, but it's not a matter of where you're born, it's a question of what you believe in, isn't it?
So anti-fascism was born early in you, at the age of 8,
yes.
And that's kind of what's...
Yes, it was. Yeah, I used to go to all the political meetings and things like that, you know, when I was young. I was a member for a short while of the West Earlham Communist League, you know, real good left-wing stuff. I saw a lot of other people too. It's only really relatively since, well, it started with Gateskill and terminated with Blair, where the Labour Party have gone so much to the right. There's virtually no significant difference between Labour, Liberal and Tory now, you know. Not in the real terms, and certainly not in terms of how they run the economy. Yeah.
A specific question on communism. Did you, with the Hungarian Revolution 1956, did that shift at all your relationship to...
It certainly changed it. I do agree with libertarianism. I had an inside leg on that, and I shouldn't have done, because you're not supposed to use an amateur radio station for purposes like this. But this in Czechoslovakia, this was.
Well, I was interested. You mentioned you went to Yugoslavia and Albania, and I wondered.
Yes, that's right. Oh, it was long after. Yes, I was in Albania long before anybody could get in Albania. Long before. A small group of us did. We managed to get there. I went mainly to try and put an amateur radio station on, because nobody was allowed to do so in Albania. Yeah. And the Foreign Office says, well, don't go, you won't get in anyway, and if you did get in, you won't get out again. Wow. And I thought, well, I don't know. You know, this happened to us before we went to Yugoslavia in the old days. And they said, you'll never get through, you'll be at the border about 2 days with paperwork. Yeah. We drive through Trieste, we go through the little bit of no man's land, got to the border, and there's a couple of beautiful girls say, welcome to Yugoslavia. Thank you. You on holiday? Yes. Thank you. Show them the passport. No, didn't even want to look at the passport. Wow.
So this was a group of you communists, or was this kind of a political? No, this was a radio.
Yugoslavia, just Norma and I. Oh, wow. Similar in Albania. Yeah. Yes, we went to Albania. That was a different kettle of fish. It's amazing. We went to southern Yugoslavia, and there was a land crossing, and a great long track with electrified barbed wire fences either side. Yeah. There's no man's land, and then you get to Albania, and suddenly, from this dirty, dusty track, there's a brand new road. Yeah. It's incredible. Their roads had everything on them. There were traffic lights and white lines and everything, but you never saw a car. Never saw one. It was incredible.
What year was this? Anyway, early 60s or late 50s? Is this?
I can't remember the date now.
So right before you started it.
When we were there. Are you there, Mo?
No, I haven't.
No, sure.
Yeah. But it was right before you started at UEA. You did these.
Oh no,
trips.
it was while I was at UEA. I think.
I see.
Yeah. Yes, it would have been while I was out. I couldn't afford to go there otherwise. I think it was anyway. Anyway, I get to Albania, and they check through everything, and they want to know what's in the parcel. I said, no, you cannot come in with it. I said, oh, have you got permission to use it? I said, not yet, but I want to see your Minister of Communications. Anyway, they wouldn't, and they insisted I took it back to Yugoslavia and left it there. So, go all the way back. No, we're not allowed to have anything coming out of Albania. You'll have to take it back with you. So back I go again. I eventually realised it would stay done up, it would be sealed, and when I left Albania, it would go with me, unless I got permission to take it in from the Minister of Communications, in which case I could come and collect it with the paperwork. It was incredible. We had one guy who had a copy of the Daily Express with him. On it was a picture of Khrushchev. Yeah. Well, that would give you the time, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah. They wouldn't let him take it in until he tore the picture of Khrushchev out. Wow. Norma had on, it was hot there, a short dress, as was the fashion at the time.
Yeah.
She wasn't allowed to go in. She had to put on another dress that was below the knee.
Wow.
Another fella had the hairstyles at the time for the men were long and that. He had to have a haircut at the border before they let him in. Really
Wow.
fun. Yeah.
Amazing.
And what was the other one? Something. I can't remember what producer. Anyway, with her there for some while, and then we went in, and we were shown all around, and we were shown us the one piece of machinery that they had, which was a big knitting mill of some sort, clothes manufacturing, all from China. Yeah, we went on the beach, in the harbour. There were Chinese submarines. I bet nobody knew they were there. But it was quite incredible. The people were fantastic. We couldn't get in any of the mosques. They're all sealed and closed. That wasn't allowed at all. The people materially were not very well off, but they were bright. One day I must have eaten something obnoxious because I had a bad tummy. Norma went out on a trip. And I said, "I'll be all right. Leave me on the beach." I had a taste of their health service. Anyway, they're a group of youngsters, about your age, some a bit less than that. Do you know I was doing mathematics on the beach with them that my biophysics students couldn't do? They spoke English, German, French, Albanian, Chinese, what else? They had about 8 languages. The education was incredible.
Yeah.
But they're
Highly international, isn't it?
Quite amazing.
Yeah.
But when you drove through Tirana, there were very poor looking places there. And as I say, you never saw a car. The only people allowed cars were doctors and what was the other class? I think that was part of the political establishment anyway. And the rule was, until everybody can have a car, nobody will have a car.
So this effort to set up a pirate radio station, basically?
No, not pirate, amateur radio.
Amateur radio. Did you have a connection with people there then that wanted? I mean, how were you?
No,
did
none
you meet,
whatsoever.
No. Did you meet anyone that wanted to do this amateur radio?
Well, I meant to meet the Minister of Communications.
Oh, I see. So you were
got on well, cup of coffee and everything,
and
talked to him about it, and he sort of had that worried look.
Yeah.
And then in what he was saying, it dawned on me. He was the Minister of Communications, He looked after the buses and the trains. That was his job. Nothing to do with radio communications. He said, no, that's all the army says up on there. Nobody is allowed to transmit or receive. Just a receiver, he said. But you can have the receiver. Well, they sent the receiver up for me, so I spent a little while listening, and that was it. So I couldn't get on. They are now. There's several stations on in Albania. But in amateur radio, we have a little contest. There's an award everybody tries to get, which is for communicating with 100 different countries.
Yeah.
Well, I've got every country. I'm right at the top of the pile now. Everyone, every reef, every sandbank, every desert island, the lot. 358 of them altogether. The whole issue now, because I've been at it a long while, since I was about 20 years old. But Albania was needed by everybody because nobody was allowed on, so that's why I went to put it on the air.
Yeah. Amazing.
So we did well there.
Yeah. I've been asking too many questions. Do you have any questions?
No, it's been listening. It's been good.
Have I covered you for what you needed?
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
You sure?
Yes,
Yeah.
you told us a great deal. I mean, I suppose you said you don't have much of a connection with UEA now, and part of our interest in this was stemming from what's happening to universities, and the rising costs of universities next year.
And the protests.
I mean, I suppose one thing that'd be interested to hear about, what did you think of what was going on in terms of student radicalism in the late 60s? We didn't really talk talk about that. I mean, whether you thought though it was really happening at UEA, because I think the impression we've gotten from other interviews is that it was rather weak at UEA. The sort of student radicalism wasn't.
There wasn't that much, but of
Yeah.
course there weren't that many students.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah.
Ian Gibson and I, when we were in both the SWP, the council here was going to close down an old folks' home here in Helsden, and they were just going to put them out just like that.
Yeah.
I was a magistrate there. They made me a magistrate, God knows how or why. I'll never know who suggested me.
You obviously taken seriously as a responsible person. Because you...
Well, this letter came that you have been asked to be a magistrate. You have been appointed a magistrate in the Norwich. Well, I didn't want to do that. You know, I'm not a suitable sort of person. And then I thought to myself, well, I don't know. You know, with my beliefs, because I believe in absolute equality of all people, regardless of religion, sex, age, anything. I really believe in that. And I knew that many of the people on the bench were very haughty, right-wing people, very authoritative. So anyway, they put me on. And I was sat on the juvenile committee. They put me on with a lady called Lady William Percy. I thought, oh my God, we're going to get on well, you know. I bet she's got a torture chamber in the dungeon. And I thought, it'd be awful. How am I going to tell her, you know, what my views are? We'll have total incompatibility. Do you know, she was a lovely old dear.
Yeah.
She said, Mr. Gowen, may I call you Pat? I said, please do. You know, she said, I ought to tell you that I do not think there is such a thing as a bad child. There's a bad environment, there's bad planning, and there's bad parents. But not in the child itself. And I believe in absolute equality between all ages, blah, blah. And I was hearing myself think.
Yeah.
I thought, you lovely old bird, you know. And we did. We went on like a house on fire and did all the right things. Anyway, in that capacity, Ian said, how can we get into that old folks' home? You know, that's all locked up now. How can you do it? So, well, if you break a lock or force a lock, it's liable. But I'll tell you what we could do. You could take a window out, providing you replace it afterwards and have done no damage. So Ian sent a couple of students up to get the right size bit of glass. We took a window out and they occupied it. It was him and about 7 students and about 3 other people. And they occupied it and eventually it got opened again. That was quite good.
Yeah, right.
Ian and I used to go up. It was during the coal miners' strike. They were, you didn't hear half of that. They were starving them out. They had barricades on the roads. They wouldn't let any food lorries or anything through. And we went up with food convoys taking, you know, all the necessities of life up there with them. So we went through and saw them because they were holding out. They did for a long while, of course, against the police. But it was an interesting thing. One of the guys who came with us, he had a cousin or something there, and he was on the picket line. And he told him that, he said, you'll never believe this, he said, but yesterday, he said, I looked at the police following us, and there was my nephew, he said.
Wow.
He's with BAOR in Germany, in police uniform. They brought the army in.
What year was this? What year? Wow.
The miners' strike, Scargill.
Okay.
1900 and something. Sorry.
Yeah.
It went on for a while.
Yeah.
This would be in about the 2nd, 3rd month of the strike. It went on for a long while. So we did things like that, and there, of course, the students were with us.
Yeah.
They weren't the students, they were just part of our group. You know, we all had a common belief. Some of them were other members of the union and other people were around, and we had several convoys running in like that.
I suppose the question I was going to ask got into the student radicalism, is what do you think of UEA now? I mean, that's maybe a good closing question.
I'm not really qualified to speak.
Yeah.
Perhaps the fact that I seem little interest tells you that I'm not regarding it with any compassion at all. I do occasionally go up in environmental sciences if they've got something on which I particularly want to see or hear, if I hear about it. But my dealings are very small now, and you know, it seems almost a foreign country when I'm there now. The trouble is, of course, your attachments are more with people than they are with the site itself.
Yeah.
And they've nearly all gone. I've outlived most of the people who are around about my age, because I was 80 this year. Yeah. Mentally, I'm only 6, though. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Do you have any more questions?
I was going to ask, because you said that you went to Yugoslavia with your wife, so I wondered if you'd met her at UEA or...
No, Norma was she's a local girl. Her brother was working with me when I was with Coleman's in food research there.
Okay.
And he was quite ill, and I popped round to see him, and I met Norma there.
How old were you?
About 22, 23, something like that. I have 2 questions to ask her. Hang on. When we went to Albania, wasn't it? And where did we get married?
I did think of a...
I'll take it back on.
A leading
Perhaps, I
question.
mean, so much rich material in there that I kind of got
Can you use it?
taken away from UEA. But I mean,
Yeah, we're in Albania.
should we? Is that on right now?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I didn't mean to have it on. I mean, maybe a question on the kind of structure of actually building the school. I mean, he mentioned that he's given all his money to what was required of you. What did you have to purchase? What was involved in the making of UEA at that level?
Well, my professor used to leave it all to me.
Yeah.
It was something he could and should have done, Jack Dainty. But I bought all the oscilloscopes, all the teaching machinery we used, the various bits of apparatus. I'm trying to think at the moment. Did the negotiations for it, the timings for delivery, and etc. There's quite a large amount of stuff that you use in a biological laboratory for teaching. The books which were necessary. There was a library just then being formed, so they looked after that side of it. So I handled all that and the payments for it as well. Did the general departmental organisation, allocation of technical resources, assisted where necessary in research projects where more than 2 hands were needed. I was sort of everything from the top manager to the do-it-all,
the handyman,
the goofer.
Yeah.
Go for this, go for that.
Yeah. Was there discussion on how to teach? I mean, was there, we're going to have small groups, or I mean, I suppose there necessarily were small groups at first, but
yes, they were ideal. Yeah, we had seminars for just about everything, and we used to try to involve them with practicals as well. And we used to try and make them interesting, which was sort of off the academic officiality. Things like, do plants communicate? And one interesting experiment, which I could never explain, we had a David Aikman. He was a PhD student, came from Aberdeen, where George Duncan headed from too. We used to get a couple of sensitive plants, mimosa, or I used to get a couple of sensitive plants, and we would set them up. You could use any plant for this, and you put electrodes on them on a tremendously high impedance voltmeter which detects tiny voltages without actually shorting the plant out. You know, the whole idea of biology is that your observation and measuring equipment should not interfere with the experiment itself. Otherwise you defeated the object. You haven't looked at it in the natural environment. We connect this up with one, and of course you get this steady voltage, which impacts the osmosis and everything, the flow. And then the students would come in, and each of them was given an instruction in a sealed envelope. And one of them was in the next compartment as to smash up one of these plants to destroy it, not the other one. And then we would observe the readings on the unaffected plant.
Wow.
And you know, when this happened, the voltages went crazy in the other plant. It was amazing. We should have seen this through. But the interesting thing was, when we recirculated the students again to observe the other plant, when the person went in, and none of the others knew who it was, only they knew the one who... The readings went all wobbly again on the other plant, as if it recognised the person.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. Ever since then, you know, I think, you know, I'm smashing me weeds out of the garden with
they
a
know
hoe.
your
I thought,
smell. These
are living things. They just don't live at the rate we do, and we don't recognise it. You know,
Stunning.
a cabbage, when you pull it up, must go, ow!
It's like you talk to your flowers, isn't it? So they
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of this.
Yeah.
There was another one we used to do as well. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was something in this line. There's one concocted by David, but of course this used to fascinate the students.
Of course, yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
as I say, it wasn't part of the normal course, but it certainly integrated them into the physiology of plants.
So a lot of hands-on work then with the students.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Rather than studying a book.
Rather
and,
than studying, they did their own studies, you see.
Yeah.
We were there to provide the tools to do it with and the means to do it with. And, you know, the communications to do with it as well. But we certainly had small groups, about 5, I think, at the most in those days, which is lovely because you can give a lot of personal attention. You can't do that with a crowd in a teaching lab at all, well, really. I'm trying to remember what the other one was we used to perform. That was something in that line, anyway. No.
Well, if you remember it, you can always email me and I can put it in the file.
That's right.
You know, so.
There was something which I thought, you know, I'd like to follow that up, but I don't think anybody's ever done it. One or two Indian doctors have, but of course they always do scientific things in that sort of way.
Yeah. Proving Hinduism really does work.
Could be.
Yeah. I wondered if you had a photograph of yourself from back then that we might be able to copy so that it could become part of the celebration.
I don't know of one. I'll have a look.
Yeah, but it's no rush, of course. But I just thought it would be lovely to have an image of you from at UEA, or not even, or even just from that period.
I've got a very old, crinkly one of myself in my amateur radio station when I was there. That would be about 1954.
Wow.
1955.
Yeah.
I've got there. I could send you that.
Yeah.
I'll
I could come back and copy one at some point.
Well, no, I can email it to you.
Oh, right.
I have your email, haven't I?
You do.
Yeah. Just remind me of it, just in case.
Camilla.Schofield at UEA.
Camilla, 2 L's, dot Schofield.
Yeah, SCH. Did you have any other questions? I sort of ran in and cutting in a bit.
.co.uk.
Yeah.
.ac.uk.
Yes, that's right.
Early.
It's
.ac.uk, not co.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Camilla.Schofield
At
UEA.
UEA.ac.
academic.
Yeah. .uk. That's it.
.uk.
Well done.
Okay, I know I've got it, but that's just to
Yeah.
cover me,
Yeah.
because I get so many emails, you know.
You
Sometimes
seem
I've
you
got
actually
60
you're
a day.
a good emailer. I could have.
Yes. Well,
I'm not such a good
we had
emailer.
nearly all our community had so many scientific papers on marine
I
things,
see.
which I farm out, you
Obviously,
see,
yeah,
and
yeah.
get feedback on. We
Yeah,
use
yeah,
that, saves
yeah.
a fortune,
Yeah,
and it's quicker.
yeah,
Yeah, I should be able to find you something.
that would be lovely.
I've got a feeling.
Well, we could take a picture. I mean, we could take a picture
Yeah, we
of
could take a
it
picture.
now.
Mm-hmm.
But,
I've got
did you have any
one of me
questions?
sitting down at our Hemsby bungalow. I can send you that.
Well, that would be
You
great.
know,
Yeah,
that's a good one. I'll send you that. That's a more recent one.
Okay, fabulous. It's just I think it's nice for people to see
See the
the
voice, the
yeah,
face of the
yeah,
voice.
exactly.
I've got quite a lot of video stuff because I used to do quite a bit with BBC, ITV on programmes. We did a whole panorama, and
Yeah.
a whole first Saturday on it about the pollution and what have you, and these sort of things. And I've
Yeah.
done Country File, I think, about 3 times over. Haven't done one for a long while now. They've gone off environmentalism now. That's cold
Yeah.
now.
Mm.
That's not in view, but it was for a while. And
Yeah.
how?
Yeah, I think people think it's now seeped into the broader public consciousness environment. So it's not. I don't know. It's not.
You wouldn't think
The
so
same
by
things.
behaviour, though.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do about a picture. Norma might well be able to find one. I can't remember ever having done any. I know we took some on the fungus forays, which was set up, which I organised with,
Fungus forays.
yeah,
What does that mean?
for the botanists really. There's a
Is that mushroom
Super-
collecting, or is that?
yeah, mushroom and fungi generally. It's a day out really, it's an excuse to do it.
Yeah.
It was a study of the botanical variety of wheat fen broad. We had a completely unqualified but brilliant botanist called Ted Ellis.
Mm.
I think the UEA made him a doctor, actually. I did. Lovely old boy. And he lived in this ramshackle fall-down house, miles from anywhere, in the middle of Wheatfen Broad.
Mm.
And his wife, too. She's mad as a hatter, but a lovely person.
Yeah.
And he invited us all out there. We used to take all the students out, and the idea, everybody collected as many mushrooms and toadstools of everything they could gather, and he'd identify the lot, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the excuse for a good day out, like such as my trips with the bootman, you know. But that's a good way to get away from the office.
Yeah. Norwich is certainly a good location to take people out, isn't it? into
Oh
the
yes,
country? Yeah.
rural, you see,
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
in with East Anglian
Yeah.
studies
Yeah.
too, of course.
Yeah.
Some good stuff around here.
Yeah.
Anyway, for the picture, I'll hunt up something and I'll email it to you. As
Fantastic.
I might possibly have one. Look back in old albums of when I was at UEA, but I can't remember ever having taken any photographs there at all. Sorry about that. We're usually too busy.
Yeah. Do you have any questions, or are you
No.
good? No. Okay.
Is there anything that you feel you want to add at the end?
Once you've gone, I'll think of something else. In which case, I'll send it to you by email,
Yeah.
Okay.
or give you a phone or something like that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Nice to have such company. I don't see many people these days.
Shall I turn it
Yeah.
off?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.